Good morning. Continue our review of the conclusion of Hemshech Ayin Beis, and we are on page 1414, Aleph Tov Yud Dalet. And the Rebbe Rashab is continuing to explain the two dimensions of Mamala Kalam and Sevu Kalam, and they're joining together. So he's already gone into them bringing together with the Makif is Nimshech into the Pnimi. So they're the two separate hisbonenus, different types of contemplation, one of the divine within existence, and that is a contemplation that leads to an ava, which he doesn't specifically name b'chol avavcha, but it's clearly b'chol avavcha, which fills up the person with desire to that godliness permeate him in a revealed way, manifest way. The second is hisbonenus in the divine that's beyond existence, sevu klam, which leads to a love, a desire, a deep desire and thirst to be encompassed in the source. Exact opposite tenuah, movement. Instead of bringing down hamshacha halah, rotze, not shuv. Obviously, we need both. That's very clear. But that second one is called b'chol nafshecha, Mesiras Nefesh, Mesiras kol haritzenis, where you give away and surrender and you commit yourself completely only to God, and not even to Giluyim, not even to the revelation of the divine in your heart and soul. Completely on God's terms, as much as one is possible. And that is B'chol Nafshecha. So these are the two levels that relate earlier to the level of Ayin and Ishin Einay, Hu Ubezdin, Hu being the higher level of Bina or Keser, Lashon Nister, and Bezdin being like Einei Ha'eda of the Sanhedrin that relate to the Midas, that relate to the Midas, to the functionality, to the implementation of Torah, which is what the Sanhedrin Einei Ha'eda do. And then, as he continued the discussion, he brought the medrash on what is Hu. That we find 5 times Hu in the positive, 5 times in the negative. Basically, 5 times by righteous people like Avraham, Hu Avraham. And he explained that Hu, which is Lashon Nister, also means a certain consistency and continuity, a permanence. Hu tzaddik b'tchilase v'atsefer. The level of leishanisi, which comes from seviv, that's higher than the structure of existence, with the goal of drawing that down into the world of shinui, and that's Avraham, Hu Avraham. And that's where he starts bringing these two sides, bringing them together. That Avraham joined the chibur of the two. So the way God created the world is Mamala Kalalman, the kav that enters into existence after the tzimtzum to create existence. Then there's Seviv Kalalman, which is higher than the kav, like Eir Ein Sof before the tzimtzum or the Igul Hagadol, or Eir Ein Sof in after the tzimtzum that remains beyond the structure of Eiris and Kalim. And then there's the joining them together. That's through Aveda. That doesn't happen on its own. The creation has the structure and beyond the structure. So what Aveda is it? The Aveda of Avraham, the Aveda of Moshe Rabbeinu, and our Aveda, B'chol Nafshecha. So that brings together what he called Hamshacha of Makif into the Pnimi. Chibur b'chinas HaMakif to come Sheyer b'Pnimius. Chibur b'chinas HaMakif ha'Pnimi. And that's the hay that's added to Avram, because Avram is Keser, Seichel Nelim Mechol Rayin, Chochma within Keser, and Avraham is being Nimshach Avram into the hay, the Gili of Bina, which is already a Gili in Atzilus. That's also Kedesh Kadoshim, Kedesh HaKadoshim, the Gimel Rishenish, Keser, Chochma, and Bina, the Yichud of Yudkei. Then continuing on page 1414, he said that so Echad Avram is the way it's Be'etzem is coming Begili. Based on that, you can say there's a similarity. He says Fizeh Avram is similar to Moshe, where there's no psik taima, there's no dividing line, a partition, because it's one flow. Because Moshe, as he was in Atzilus, that's how he's in Bria. And the same, you could say, similar to Avram. He's going to explain the difference between them further. We didn't get there yet. But even though by Avraham it says psik taima, which seems to suggest there is a partition. By Moshe, there is no partition. So he says, "B'kol mokem yesh leimer." We can say that the psik is also comes ugam kein lechaber, mechaber. It also attaches, not just separates. And that's what we're in the middle of discussing now. And he brings the example, two examples. One is from the Yud Gimel Midas Harachmim, Havaya, Havaya, by Yikra, Havaya, Havaya. And that's the point of there, is that it should be a chibur of the two names of Havaya de Le'ela, which he says the Eir saw before the Simsum. Havaya de Latata is the Kav, the Eir, the Mamala, that's so Seviv, and the Eir Mamala, which is the Havaya de Latata. In between them is the Simsum. So you could think that Simsum is mafsik. It is. The Simsum is like a separator. Like, so in other words, between Havaya and Havaya, there's like a level of Elikim. Like we'll say in a moment about Shema, Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem. There too, you have two Havayas separated by Elikim, which is a Simsum. But that's the way it's initially that way. And through Aveda, through our Aveda, Yud Gimel Midas Sarachmim, as he explains and will explain, and Krishma, the Mesiras Nefesh of Shema, both those levels bridge that the hefsik, the psik, timer, becomes a connector, not just a divider. So that's what you have, the connection between both of them, the B'shoshim, Shem Avad Le'ela, Shem Avad Tata, and that's separated by the Tzimtzum, the Elikim, Psik timer, Gavai B'chinas, at Tzimtzum, Mokim Ponei, and through Val Yidei, Yud Gimel Midas Arach, Mechene Adei Krishma, Nasi Chabrus Beis Hashemus Al Yidei Psik timer. That there becomes a joining to the two, which is, of course, an Aveda. That doesn't just happen automatically. So he's saying, similarly, we're going to say the same thing with Avraham, who Avraham. But then, of course, remains the question, so what's the difference in Avraham and Moshe? So I began answering it in yesterday's class, but I realized that the Rebbe Rashab himself addresses it. So that's where we're up to, and we're going to continue learning that now, how this separator, this divider, this partition, also becomes a connector, which is very much relates to the bigger theme that began early of Ayin Beis in general, the interface, where the big operative question was, can a post-Simsum reality experience a pre-Simsum consciousness? Or the other way around, a post-Simsum consciousness experience a pre-Simsum reality? When Simsum is so critical for the very essence, for the very possibility of existence, as the Arizal says. And the answer is yes, as he explained. Not by bypassing the Simsum, not by overriding it, not by surrendering to it, but by transforming it. So the Simsum can be a divider, but it could also become a connector. And he explained that at length. That's a big part of the Havayu Hu Elikim, V'yedaita Yem Hashvesa Ki Havayu Elikim, and then Ein Eid, the Helam Ha'atzmi that we've been learning. We'll discuss this later more in detail when we connect these themes to what we learned earlier. But he did discuss that idea earlier, the joining together of the two. So this is very much fits into that theme. But interestingly, even though he's talking now about the joining, he hasn't yet really spelled out what is the third level, but he'll do that in a few pages from now. And then it'll all come together. Because that's the ultimate goal.
There is
So bottom line is, I just want to say that the Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem, I recall correctly, back in the Shavuos Maimer, I'm just going back to Ayin Beis, volume 2. I want to just refer a page. I'll take your question in a moment. 1 second. Let me just finish pointing this out. I believe, let me see, where was it? Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem. Now, first I thought it was on page 997. I see it. I still think it's there. 1 second. Let me see. It may not be there, but he did talk about earlier these two levels of Havaya and how they get connected. I thought I'd find it quickly. Okay, I'll look around later.
Chelek Aleph or Chelek Bet?
Okay,
So Moshe is not psik timer. That means that higher than this thing, the
I just said the
Memutza.
Rebbe Rashab is going to explain the difference between Moshe and Avraham a little further down. Yeah.
So I had a question about.
The bottom line is, yes, he compares Moshe, Avraham to Moshe, but then he's going to qualify distinction. The key thing is that Avraham, the psik time of Avraham is not just a mafsik, it's also a machaber. That's the main thing he wants to say here. With Moshe, we'll soon see what he says about Moshe. He's going to talk about the second, lower down on this page.
So a quick question about the two names of Shem Havaya, De La'ela, De Latata, and he said here, the Rebbe said that the second name, lower name, Shem De Latata, is the Kav, but Shem Havaya I thought is Makif. So I'm confused in the notion that there's a Shem of Havaya that is De Latata, the lower one, which is the Kav, which I thought was Mamale, and you mentioned the what we learned before, the Daitayim Hashavasa Lavaki Havaya Hu Elokim, and I thought Shem
Elokim is the Tzimtzum. Elokim is the Tzimtzum.
Elokim is a name of God. It's
the power of God to conceal. The Kav, even though it's Mamal, is the power to reveal. The Tzimtzum conceals, the Kav reveals.
Okay, but we're talking about names of God, and so
I
God
just said there's the power of God to conceal. That's the Elokim. Is God's power to conceal. He has a power to conceal. That's the Koyach HaTzimtzum. Vadin, that's Shem Elokim. Shem Havaya is the power to reveal. In revealing, there's two levels, Sevav and Mamal.
Okay. Obviously, that seems pretty basic, but somehow I missed that. Thank you.
Okay.
So, but we're going to get into this. But I mean, we talked about in Shema that when you say Hashem Elokeinu, you're saying that the God that is pre Tzimtzum is the same. That's Makif is the same as the God that is Mashgiach over the Olamos, over the worlds. That's
which
Mamale.
Is the second Havaya, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem. That's what he says. The two Shemas Havaya refers to Sevav and Mamala. The Mashgiach is not Elokeinu, it's Hashem, the second Hashem. It's the same thing. Elokeinu is Tzimtzum, in between the Makif and the Pnimi, which is the Hashem Elokeinu. He says two Shemas Havaya in Shema, and in between there's an Elokeinu, which is the Tzimtzum, which is the way it is. First there's Ein Sof, unfettered, the root of Sevav Klalman. Then comes the Tzimtzum Elokeinu. Then comes the Kav, which is the Havaya De Latata that relates to existence.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, that's what we're learning here. If you find something else, you want to show me a source that's different than this, I'm happy to look at it. But that's what he says here, and it's consistent with everything we've been learning.
So what's the nature of Shem Elokim in the pasuk by Daita Hayom?
He's not discussing that here. That's discussed earlier. That's that even in the Helam,
right?
Even the Elokim, even the Helam is also a power of God. Is also in order to bring Gilui, and in order to make sure the Gilui comes into our. And he's discussed it at length in Volume 2 and the beginning of Volume.
Yeah. Well, that's why I'm referring to it.
Yeah, but that's not what he's discussing here. That's earlier where he talks about the Elokim. Here he's talking about the two Havayas, with Elokim being
Okay. Elokim is the name for God. Can we agree on that?
Excuse me?
Can we agree that that Elokim is the name of God?
That's not a question. The power of God to conceal. I'm not sure what's the problem. God has many powers. Havaya is also not the ultimate definition of God. Havaya is the power to reveal. Elokim is the power to conceal. This is hundreds of times in Ayin Beis.
So the Hashgacha is not Shem Elokim, it's Shem Havaya De Latata.
He doesn't say that here. He doesn't speak about Hashgacha here. You want to make that association? He did say 2 pages back that the Hashgacha of Havaya is the higher Hashgacha on Yisrael, and the Hashgacha from Shem Elokim is the Malachim. But that he really means Hashem Havaya shining through Elokim as it comes into law. He doesn't go into that distinction. Here he's talking about the two Havayas. Elokim obviously also has a role where it could channel Havaya as well. But you want to connect the two. I would then say that there's places where he speaks about Havaya and Elokim. Here he's speaking about the two levels of Havaya, with Elokim being the tzimtzum in between. Remember, it's the tzimtzum that allows the kav to be a kav. For the kav to be a mashgiach on kol elements, which is the tzimtzum is just a concealment. The tzimtzum does not mashgiach anything. If there was no kav, there was no mamala, you just have concealment. The tzimtzum allows for the kav to then emerge and serve as, so if you want, you could break it down. That tzimtzum allows for the kav to do its job. But he did say clearly, a few pages back, that is correct. When he spoke about the two levels of Ashgacha, he said that there's the Ashgacha from Shema Havaya, the Ashgacha of Shema Elokim.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah, on page 12:14:10.
Yitzhak, this question was very clarifying for me, the explanation that Rabbi gave.
Okay.
Yeah, for me too. I had a fundamental misunderstanding of Shem Elokim until, well, let's just say partial misunderstanding. Thank you.
Look, from God's point of view, all the names are all part of that one unity. It's just the way the tracks that he uses to create existence. So there's Havaya, Elokim, and then when now you break it down further, there's Havaya before the Tzimtzum, Havaya after the Tzimtzum, Elokim in between. Yeah.
In the non-Hasidic Misnagdic world, they refer to Shem Havaya as, when we do too here, as Shem's right hand, the God of mercy, and Shem Elokim is the God of Gvura.
This is a Chazal. This is not about Misnagdim or Chassidim. Chazal say Havaya is Rachamim and Elokim is Din. That's for sure. It just doesn't yet talk about the levels of the mystical levels of Chassidus. But the idea that Havaya is Rachamim, Elokim is Din, it says it in Rashi, right, at the beginning of Chumash. Okay.
That's fine. It's fine. I have to go and learn some more, but thank you.
Any other questions? So let's continue. We are around third way down, page 1414. The line Vayidei Yud Gimel Zamrachim, the end of the line. The pages can be found at ayinbeis.com, and here we go. Vayinyan. He's explaining now how a divider can become a connector. Like we spoke about boundaries. How boundaries can serve as the role of separating, and that's indeed how God used it when He created existence. But our avodah is to actually bridge the two. I mentioned yesterday there was a gzeira between Elyenim lo yardu lamata v'tachtenim lo yalu lamayla. Before Matan Torah, there was a certain schism, fundamental breach between spirit and matter, spirit, energy, and matter. And Matan Torah bridged that. Our avodah is to bridge the two, but you first have to have those boundaries because you need the structure. You don't want to destroy the structure. So we say, for example, when Mashiach comes, Mola Oretz Deis Hashem Kamayim Layam Achasim, the knowledge of God will fill the world like the waters cover the sea. If you did that now, before Mashiach's coming, before the world is refined, it would flood the land. So you need to prepare, like we've talked many times about a student studying level by level until his mind is able to fully grasp at 40 years his teacher's inner, deeper wisdom. So you always need to have first structure, and then you start filling the structure up and slowly assimilating it, refining it to the point that it can assimilate higher levels of divine energy, which is essentially the whole way. This is essentially the story of all of Avodas Hashem. You don't want to go too fast. You don't want to go too slow. You want to do it in a process. So he says like this now, Va'inyan, who? The Beseder Yishtalshus, the Tikkun, because the Seder Yishtalshus of Tikkun, in contrast to Tohu, where it's a chaotic, imbalanced world, but in the world of Tikkun, Seder Yishtalshus, though it's a structure, Kol B'chinas Havdalah, every level of separation, Hagam Shezeu Mavdil, that's why it's called Havdalah. Though it separates, Harizeh Gam Ke Mechaber Beis HaMadreges. It also serves a role to connect the two levels. Like I mentioned yesterday, if the human body decided all the organs and limbs and all the cells and every detail of your human body decided, let's create we'll call it an organ conference of unity and harmony. We'll all be equal. Those distinction between the mind and the heart and the liver and the lungs and the whatever and the bladder sounds very nice, right? It's like a little like a socialist conference. Everyone's equal. However, there's one small problem. The whole thing would fall apart in the name of this so-called equality. You want them to be unique and separate. And then they can work well together. So it's the classic paradox of diversity, as it was mentioned, as I always mention, harmony within diversity. That's the beauty of it. All beauty is that way. It's a composite of many different elements. Yes, if you put them in the wrong order, or God forbid, if it's not healthy, they can clash. But if they're healthy, they create the most powerful, positive thing, which is also nature is that way. So even though sometimes it may appear that one component or one aspect is conflicting with another, then you realize, no, each one's serving their function. So when you put a piece of food in your mouth, that food, in a healthy way of swallowing and digesting, it will go into your food pipe, not into your windpipe. And when it does so, you also need to breathe properly, so you have a balance. And different valves will close and open appropriately as the process, I'm just using the digestive process as an example, each in their time. If it opens too quickly or closes too quickly, that's where you have a problem. So it's a constant balance of many different forces at work that they should all come together in one harmonious system. So basically he's saying, Seder Shtalshus of Tikkun, it works that way. There's Havdalah, but every Havdalah is also a connector. Like he says, Gamkim Beis HaMadregas, the two levels it's separating. So when we say Amavdil ben Kodesh L'Chel Saturday night, so it's Havdalah between Kodesh and Chel, but as the Rebbe emphasizes so often, once you separate, now you can be Mamshich, the Kedush of Shabbos into the weekday. That doesn't make the weekday Shabbos, but it gives the power of Shabbos can now also spill over into the weekdays on its terms. But first you need to have the separation. Ukamo Yehida Kia. Where do we find the first place there's a Havdalah? Second day of creation. What's happened the second day? It says Yehida Kia Vayi Mavdil. The whole world was covered in water, and everything was like one seamless whole. And the Eibishter separated the higher waters from the lower waters, Rakia from the Uretz. And then earth, the land, dry land emerged. So it's a mavdil. He calls it clearly a mavdil. Shemavdil be'mayim el yenim l'mayim tachtenim. He's separated between the higher waters and the lower waters. The higher waters, like let's say the clouds that carry the water of the rain, and the water down below in the sea. He's separated. In truth, this vayavdil that Hashem employed, mavdil, and he mentions it several times, is also a connector. Because it's not like they became separate where they don't relate to each other. We need the water from above. The seas evaporate and they turn into vapor that ultimately become the clouds, and they turn water the land, etc. So it's not a point of separating them where they never see each other again. It's a separation to create structure to be able for them to work well together in a balanced way. So it's also a mechaber gamkein. U'kamoishin is bar le'il, as we learned earlier. You can look it up when in the big section in the middle of volume 2. He spoke about the parsois. The parsois are the partitions through all of hishtalshlus, the membranes in the brain, in the mind. There's the diaphragm. There's the membrane between the different membranes he speaks about there, the different partitions, and he brought there a zohar. So what did we discuss? Be'inyan the shoyev mile'ela v'yoyev latata. That though it's a parsa that separates, but it also shoyev, it draws from the higher the yoyev, and it gives yoyev. Yoyev is giving in Aramaic the latata. I think, for example, you speak about there are certain rivers that are like that. The Yarden is sometimes described that way, that the Yarden brings from one place the water and then leads it into the Yam HaMelech. And the Yam HaMelech, on the other hand, for example, does not ever only accepts water, does not give out water. That's why it ultimately dries up and it creates a salt. It doesn't have the flow. So the flow of the parsa really a divider, like it is with every piece of engineering. What really is engineering at the end of the day? Think of electricity going into appliance, or in general, even how microchips work. It's all a constant flow, not too much and not too little. So you have to gauge and you have to manage and regulate the flow. That's how it is with every basically machine. Is essentially has to have components that are regulating the flow from one part of it to the other in a paced way, not too much. And if something breaks down, let's say a faucet in your sink, could break either nothing is flowing or it's flowing too much and it's flooding. So it's all about having all the proper partitions in place. But when you do that, they end up being, like he says, Shoyev Milaela draws from the higher, and V'yoav and brings it down and transmits it to the lower. So essentially, what he's saying here is that the psik, this hefsek, this havdalah, essentially is an interface. That's really what it is. It's not just a divider; it's an interface that ultimately connects. But it connects through dividing, through separating. Well, Kamoi came. I was going back to the Tzimtzum Arishin. Kamoi came b'chinas Tzimtzum Arishin. Same as with the original, the first Tzimtzum. It's always called Tzimtzum Arish because it's the first official Tzimtzum after the Erein Sof Hayamamala Kol Metzias. Hagam Shu b'chinas Hefsek Kaneda. It's a Hefsek. What happened? The energy, divine conscious energy, was completely all-encompassing and all-pervasive. And then, like an example, the teacher withdrawing, or you can say receding, is concentrating or drawing back that energy, concealing it. So it's a hefsek. The teacher wants to teach the students, he has to stop that flow or slow down the flow. In the case of the Tzimtzum Addition, he pauses it. So it's a hefsek. That's for sure. It's a hefsek. The question is, what's the purpose of the hefsek? So he continues. How do you gamkin b'chinas mechaber? Liyes hamshachas hakav ma'eda ensof shalifniat simsum. It doesn't stop there. It's an order that then should be to connect, that there should be the kav. Once there's the stop, the symptom pauses the flow. Now we can regulate, and the flow should come in a kav, which is a thin line like a laser beam. That's because where is it coming from? The of the kav from the and self lifnei symptom, but the symptom addition is the regulator. So on one hand, yes, it separates or pauses. In this case, hefsek havdalah. On the other hand, it's a machaber.
Just like the psik timer.
What do you mean? That's exactly what he's explaining here. That's exactly what he's explaining, the psik timer. This all is coming to explain the psik timer of Avraham. He's going to get back to it. He's going to come back to it. In other words, it's explained that even though it's a psik timer, on the other hand, it's also a connector. That's what his Yeshlema was in the beginning of the top of the page. Commotion is barely ill, as we learned earlier. And this is back in volume 2 that I was referring to before. Be'inyan simsum sibas hagilui. So there he talks about that tzimtzum is the cause for the gili. Without the tzimtzum, you can never have a kav that would, going back to the example, the students trying to get the Erein Sof before the tzimtzum. Without the tzimtzum and the kav, it wouldn't work because it's too overwhelming. So you need the tzimtzum to pause it. The tzimtzum then allows the kav, which is drawing oir from before the tzimtzum, but now it's drawing it in a regulated fashion, like a kav, a line, not a full eagle, not filling up the whole chol l'makam pani, not filling up the whole space. It's like spoon feeding existence. So therefore, that's what we learned. That tzimtzum is sibas hagili. Tzimtzum, in other words, is not only a step toward the gili, is the cause for the gili. There he explained at length how the gili before Erein Sof, before the tzimtzum, is in order to come into the tzimtzum and be drawn down. And the tzimtzum is in order, tzimtzum b'shvil, there he said, b'shvil hagili. He also added sibas hagili. It's the siba, there could be a gili. If Erein Sof would have remained unfettered and unlimited, we'd never have a gili in a way that we could relate to. It would be completely divine, infinite, seamless consciousness, Ye'un Sham, and he's telling us to look there, which is interesting. Sometimes the Rebbe Rashab just tells you where he said it, then he says to look there. And my suggestion why he says to look there is because, as I said earlier, this is so much connected to the central theme of Ayin Beis, which is how do you create an interface between an existence which is so infinitely antithetical to godliness, and this is all part of this process. So, okay, Sibas Agilium Shem. Rak de Bechlolus Haishtalshus. Okay, let me stop for a moment and let's see if anybody wants to ask anything. Let's stop. Any questions? Okay, now he's going to continue and explain the difference between before Avodah and after Avodah. So basically, let me first, I'll just say it and then we'll read it inside. The first thing you have to know is that in the Shtalshlus, the way God created the Shtalshlus, you have the structure and you have this Havdalah. Because here we have not talked about bridging it. We just said, here are the steps. Erein Yisrael before the Tzimtzum, like Havai de Le'ela, comes at Tzimtzum. In order for there to come a Kav, excuse me, Sibas HaGili is the cause of the Gili of the Kav, which can now create a structured existence. Ak, Akudim, Nakudim, 10 spheres, Eris, Kalim, the whole structure. But he didn't talk about what happens now. Now you have a structure. Can we go back? Can we retrace our steps? Can we connect these two levels of Erein Yisrael before the Tzimtzum and the Kav? And that's what he's going to discuss right now. So he says like this. Here's the comment. In the general structure of Ishtalshalus, so the process is that only the outer dimension of a higher level becomes the inner dimension or the higher dimension of a lower level. In other words, it does exactly that. It regulates the flow. So when you have a faucet, for example, it's not giving you all the water of the reservoir or all the pipelines and the main lines. It's giving you a regulated flow that you can handle, that you can contain. Or when the teacher is teaching the student, he's not giving him all the air that he has in his mind, all his brilliance. He's giving him in a regulated flow based on the kalim, based on the capacity of the student. That's what he's getting. So what's the process? What is it called in Chassidish language? That the chitzenius of the higher level, the outer of the higher, is becoming the inner of the lower level. That's the process, and that continues step by step by step. This is without avodah. This is the way the structure of existence. That's why Atzilus is higher than Bria, and Bria is higher than Yetzirah, and Yetzirah is higher than Asiyah. The Kav is Milo Mato. There's a hierarchy. Kodesh Kadoshim is higher than Kodesh, and Kodesh is higher than Chayil. So there's a whole level of, there's levels. It says in the Mishnah, Eser Kadesh is saying. There are 10 levels of Kedusha in Eretz Yisrael. So that's clearly a structure. Now, what do we do? How can we bridge these levels together? Not just have the structure. And that's what he continues. He says, that's Klolos Ishtalshus. By the Yud Gimel Midas Harachim. Yud Gimel Midas Harachim was a unique, special avodah. Moshe went up on the mountain and began to pray to God, and he prayed for 40 days for forgiveness for the Jewish people after the sin of the golden calf. And that was not enough. He had to go another 40 days. It's only Yom Kippur that he comes back 80 days later. What was he doing? It was hard work. It took him a long time. It took him twice as long as receiving the Torah. It was 40 days. It took 80 days to gain forgiveness. And part of the process was to evoke from Hashem the Yud Gimel Midas Harachim, which Hashem does. Hashem says, let me reveal to you these 13, my secret attributes of compassion. Whenever you'll be in need, call upon them. That's what he achieved. That did not come automatically. So Moshe came in Ishtalshlus, and Ishtalshlus is a structure. There's even a structure that demands that someone who builds, someone who worships an idol should be put to death, actually. It's from the Avedus of Yarag La Yaver, meaning you have to die before you worship an idol. And here they worshiped the idol, and yet Moshe went beyond the structure. What he did was, he went back into the engine room, so to speak, went to Hashem himself, and Yud Gimel and draw out the Yud Gimel Midas Harachim. Well, we may never know everything Moshe Rabbeinu said and what he did and what he had to do to pray to ultimately get Hashem to reveal the Yud Gimel Midas Harachim. But clearly, it did not come easy, because we know 40 days God said no, basically. So that's another discussion, why it took so long and what was going on exactly. I find that one of the most fascinating parts of the Torah, Moshe's spending time with Hashem for those 80 days, like what was going on there. Be interesting to know. But we know some from what it says in Chumash and what it says in Midrashim. So the Yud Gimel Sarachimim, and the same thing through our Mesiras Nefesh, V'chein, Adei Mesiras Nefesh, the Krishma, V'chol Nafshecha. Those are avodas that are now, we're going out, not just B'chol Avavcha, that you're loving God with all your heart on your terms, but you're going outside of yourself, out of your comfort zone, into B'chol Nafshecha, like we said, Mesiras Nefesh, the Krishma, like earlier, giving away all your Ritzenus, Mesiras Ritzenus to Hashem. So through that avodah, which someone does, you give them Mitzarachim, which is the two Avayas, and Krishma, which is Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem, the two Avayas in Shema. Nasa yedezeh b'chinas ischabras b'chinas gili mamish. That reverses the process and causes that even though there is a structure, now you can not just get the chitzenius elyon, you can actually join both levels to the point ischabras, connecting them in a gili mamish in a revelation from the higher to the lower. Like we said, like we will say, Avraham hu Avraham, that you'll have a complete joining of the two. Well, in that, of course, there are many levels, but what you've done is countered the initial structure. So Tzimtzum created the capacity to have a kav, to create existence. And Avodas Hashem, namely here, Yud Gimel Midas Harachim and Mesiras Nefesh, is able to take us back, and that this divider becomes a connector and ultimately connects the higher level and the lower level. That's what this avodah does. Now I was going back. That's why in Krishma it says Elokeinu. So now he's teaching the word Elokeinu in an interesting way. So the Havaya, Elokeinu, Havaya Echad. So Elokeinu, that the Elokeinu, which was initially is that symptom of concealment, becomes ours. The Hainu She'eleinu, Elokeinu, to us. Hu b'chinas gili, it becomes a level of gili. That the tzimtzum becomes a level of gili. She'aleinu hu b'chinas gili, like he says in L'Kutateda in the Ma'am B'chiyah Aretz. I think that's Kisav. I'm not sure. I think it's Kisave or maybe Ekev. Now he doesn't say explicitly tzimtzum. He just says Elokeinu, but based on what he said earlier, Havaya de Le'ela, Havaya de L'Tata, is respectively Eidei before the Tzimtzum, and the Kav, so Elokeinu is a Tzimtzum in between, but the Tzimtzum is now becoming not just a separator, but also a connector, Eleinu, that this Tzimtzum, when you see how the Gili is reaching the students, and they're starting to grow and learn, and the students, through their effort, are reconnecting to the Oir Ein-Sof of the teacher. So then you look back, in retrospect, you see that the Tzimtzum actually became a revealer, even though initially it was a concealer, a divider. That's how I would touch what he's saying here. Now, if you go deeper, we learned earlier, Einoid, that Elokim is not just a Keli Tavaya, like he said, that is the Sibus Hagilui, the cause for Gili, but that the Elokim itself, the power of concealment itself, reveals the Helema Atzmi. But he's not saying that here. We'll say it at the end of the paragraph, because that's a higher level. Here we're talking about how Elokim is part of the process of Gili. If you go back to the beginning of volume 3, the first page, volume 3, he explained, Havayu Elokim and V'yadaita is that Elokim becomes part of the process of Havaya's Gili. And then comes Einoid, which teaches us that even Elokim as a tzimtzum, as a concealer, is also expresses to us a divine power, the divine Helam Ha'atzmi, the power of God to conceal, which is, as I said, that relates more to the third level than the second level. Right now, we're speaking more about the level of, well, in a way, this is the third level because he's joining the two, which comes from the third level, but he doesn't say it explicitly. That's just wanted to make that distinction. Okay. Yeah, let me stop. Any questions? And now he's going to come back to Avraham.
So just to bring full circle the question I asked originally, and I understand how Shem Elohim is essentially the tzimtzum. I understood everything you said, but at the same time, that concealment is essentially a conduit for revelation, because without the concealment, there couldn't be
That's what I just spoke about in the last 20 minutes, of course.
Yeah. Okay. So in that sense,
but it's still,
in that sense, it's a hashgacha.
No, I would not say that.
It's like a vow.
No?
No, it allows for the hashgacha to relate to existence, like the tzimtzum. The tzimtzum on its own is a concealing force. It conceals, that allows then the kav. Because then what do you need a kav for? If the tzimtzum is the hashgacha, what do you need a kav?
Okay.
The tzimtzum allows that you go from an oir that is beyond existence into an oir that relates to existence. But the tzimtzum is not oir.
I guess please indulge me here.
I think you should take it offline because it's something you're struggling with, which is fine. I don't know if, I don't want to confuse others.
Well, I don't know that
I am confusing others, because most people, at least like I said, understand Shem Elohim to be the name of God that reflects his.
Look. No? You want to discuss it with me? I'm happy to discuss it. I prefer not to go into more detail here, because I think I said it all. Elohim is a name of God, the power of God to conceal. God has a power to conceal. There are different names. God has the power to go to war, tzvos. He has the power of chesed, kale. The power of gvura, Elohim, which is concealment. The power of rachamim, havaya. These are different forces of God. The power to conceal is not less divine than the power to reveal. It's just a different form of godly expression. So no one's questioning whether it's the name of God. This question is the power of God to conceal. That's what tzimtzum is. It's like basic. It's not like a chiddush or something. That is what Elohim is. Now,
I understand.
It allows, once you have that concealment, like he says, Sibur Sagili, it's like the teacher concealing the power to refrain in order that afterwards comes the kav, which is the Havaya Del Tata, that now can enter into the kalim, because now the tzimtzum has affected the oir. It did affect it.
I understand. Thank you.
I mean, if you remember, we spoke about Helam Ha'atzmi, that the tzimtzum is actually rooted even higher than oir. Like the kalim are rooted higher than oir, because the power to conceal, in a way, reveals even a deeper power of God than the power to reveal. You remember that?
Yeah, you probably said it maybe 1,000 times.
No, but I'm saying, so that tells you that Elohim is a divine power. It just, I think he also said it earlier. When did he say the power to reveal and conceal? By the moon. The moon and the sun, he also said both are mo'ir, but one is a power to conceal, one is a power to reveal. Yeah. Is that clearer?
It is. I have
a follow-up question, but I'm not going to ask because I want to respect your order of the class, so I'll just do it offline.
Okay. Or at the end. We could do it at the end of the class.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
V'zeu gam kein Avraham. The psik timer. And this is also going back to now the beginning of the discussion. Remember the two Avraham with a psik timer, and he asked, a psik timer seems to be a hefsek, a divider. So he says, Zeu gam kein Avraham. The psik timer, which has a psik timer, hine al yedei echad hoya Avraham, because Avraham was echad hoya Avraham. That oneness, the seamlessness of Avraham, Chinas achas hi yenosi, that level that we said before, one is my dove, my beloved. This oneness of Avraham, Nasa hischabus beza madregas Avraham. So though the psik time is a divider, it also created a joining together of the two levels of Avraham. So in other words, Avraham was like the level similar to what he said by Yud Gimel Mid Sarach Mesiras Nefesh of Shema. Avraham had that ability. That's why he was unique, to join these two levels. So there was a psik timer, yes, there's a dividing element, but the divider also serves as a connector, as we just explained. V'zeh inyan Avraham hu Avraham. And that's Avraham hu Avraham, like we said, who. At the beginning of the Medrash that says Avraham, as he was Avraham, without a hey, is the same as he is Avraham with the hey, without a shinui. The seamless flow between the higher and the lower. Okay. He's not finished yet with this topic. Rabbi Rashab clearly wants to add more to it, but again, any questions? Okay. So now he says, V'hine, and now b'medrash Rabba, Nosei Pashi Yud. Bring another medrash. What does it say? Al posuk ish echad. So Pasha Nosei ish echad, I think he's referring to the Nisim, or maybe the counting. Okay, but ish echad. So the medrash says like this: Kol mokum shenemer echad. Wherever it says echad, one, godlhu, ba'kadosh baruch hu, godlhu. Sorry, wherever it says echad, godlhu. So echad doesn't just mean one; it means he's great. Echad refers to greatness, in other words, uniqueness, greatness. Ba'kadosh baruch hu nemer echad, diksiv Hashem echad, like in Shema. By Hashem we see, says Hashem Yisrael, Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. That's a proof of God. What is he saying? Not just that God is one, that God is great. Ein ki yetzebei, ein be'elim ki yetzebei. That's what the Medrash says. There's nothing in existence that's similar to him. So he's like one and unique, and that's what he means by great. One unique, exclusive, maybe a good word as well. V'chein, by Avraham, we find the Medrash says, Ksiv, diksiv, echad haya Avraham. By Avraham, we also find the word echad. So now he's introducing another Medrash in explaining what echad is, that he's been elaborating on. And he's connecting it obviously to what we're learning here. So it says, of echad Avraham, lo haya ba'esi yomim ki yetzebei. In those days, in his days, there was no one like him. So interesting. In his days, it doesn't say in all days. That's Echad Avraham. He was unique, special, exclusive in his time. Even though there was no one like him. Yet the Medrash qualifies it was only in his days, in his time period. By Hashem, obviously, we don't say that because there's nothing in existence forever, ever that's like God. But by Avraham, that's that qualification. It was great, but in his time. And this is how the Rebbe Rashab is going to explain the difference between Avraham and Moshe. Because now, even though we said that Avraham created echad, a unity between higher and lower, and the psik timer is also a connector. However, we know there's a limit on the echad, that it was only in his time. Here's how he's going to explain it. So he says like this now. V'yashleimer Avram himshech hagilui rak la'atzmei ubizmanei. What the Medrash is saying, not just a technicality that happened to be the greatest in his time, but not in other times, that Avram's avodah was one that was limited to the Mamsheh the Gili just in his time, la'atzmei rather, just to him, ulizmane, ubizmane, and in his time period. So Avram was great, but what he did was primarily, or was only affecting him and his generation. But that gili did not remain afterwards. That's what he's adding, the Rebbe Rashab. Now, that doesn't mean there was no effect. Obviously, there's an effect because he left Yitzchak and he left children and he influenced the world till this day. But the gili, the way it was in the time of Avraham, was primarily for his period in time. He doesn't even say primarily. I'm adding that, but you have to say something of that nature. But let's see how he explains it further. This is a big statement. So you're finding that as I mentioned yesterday, remember Moshe, as we'll soon learn, brought the Torah to the world. The Torah was a whole new revolution. Avraham Avinu brought Gilui Elokus, and a Gilui Elokus that changed existence. But in some way, it still was contained in his period of time. Like Chassidus speaks about, that the Ruchnis, the Kaveda of the Ovis, even though they fulfilled all the Torah, but it was all spiritual. It didn't transform the material world. So let's read on and we'll see how he develops this. He says like this, Va'inyanhu, and the inyan in this is, how do we explain this? In Teira Er, another Maimer, Moshe Yadaber, Mevayer, a Hefresh ben Avraham and Moshe. He explains the difference in Avraham and Moshe. As I said, that's what he's going to explain now. What's the difference? The Avraham himshich hagili rak ba'elam Atzilus. He explains Avraham drew down the gili only in the world of Atzilus, which is a chiddush, because like we said, Keser is higher than Atzilus, and the higher levels are separated from the lower levels, and yet Avram connected the two, and he brought it into Atzilus. Moshe himshich hagili lamata, and Moshe brought down the gili down below, like the Medrash said. Avraham Avinu reversed the process and began bringing the Shekhinah down, but he didn't bring it down to earth. He brought it down from the seventh heaven to the sixth heaven, after it was nostalgic and was concealed and receded due to the sins and transgressions, starting from the sin of the tree of knowledge. He didn't bring it down lamata. Moshe never gili lamata. But then the Rebbe Rashab says, but havahaloi, isn't it a fact that Avraham himshel gam ken gili elokus lamata? Are we saying everything Avraham did was only in Atzilus? We know, we look in the Torah, clearly he affected people on this earth. It wasn't just in the higher worlds. That he came to a place and he called it Kel Elam. He revealed God is the God of existence. He revealed godliness, but Elam in the world. El Elam. She'edia elokuse be'elam chulu. He informed and revealed God's presence in the world. That was what Avraham Avinu did. It was a pagan world serving itself. Avraham didn't just do it for himself. Whoever he met, we know that he influenced and shaped and changed people's lives on earth. So what does the Alter Rebbe mean in Torah Er, that he only was Mamshech and Atzilus, not Lamata? And it says further, V'ksiv v'sanefesh asher asa b'chara. It says a nefesh, the souls that he created in a chara, which means, like he says there, that he was mekarev, he brought people closer to God, like he says, Targum Unkelis, Dishabidu la'araisa. He was meshabed them to Torah. He had them commit. He got them inspired to commit and be meshubed, would be committed, they're dedicated to serve what Hashem wants from Torah, la'araisa. So that's a direct effect. He had an effect on Nefesh Asher B'charim to the point that we call him as like their spiritual parent. That's why it says Asher Asher B'charim. He was Megayer Anoshim. Sarah was Megayer Anoshim, the women. So this was all an effect in this world, not Atzilus alone. So Yesh Leimer, the Rebbe Rashab says. So what is that? What do we mean then? Atzilus, only in Atzilus. That the Hamshach of Avram was to those that were on his level, his quality and his level, malose bedregose, at his stature, obviously not exactly in his stature, but somewhat proportionate to Avraham. Sheyuchlu lahamshich ha'se'er, to people who were there, they were
Like
capable of
Yitzchok.
receiving.
Like Yitzchok.
Sorry, 1 second, let me just finish reading.
No,
Sheyuchlu
Maloshe
lahamshich
bedregose.
ha'se'er, in order, sheyuchlu, people where he could be mamshich the eir, they were capable of receiving the eir that Avraham had to say. Avaloi, loy b'klol ha'elam. Not just in general, the entire world. So he's saying, pretty big chiddush, but that's what he says. That even though, yes, Avram was mamshich elikus in this world, but it was to a specific target audience. People on his quality that he was able to be mamshich to, like students that could relate to him, but not just in the general world. And what it says, Nefesh asher asa b'charan, the Rebbe Rashab says, Kimeduma. Kimeduma is a very rare expression of Chassidus, meaning I think, I recall. Or Kimeduma shemavur shechazru l'sudan, that those of the people he did influence returned back after Avraham Avinu left. They went back to their original ways. I went to look for the source for that. I haven't found it yet, but he's saying here clearly. So two things he's saying. First of all, Avram's ashpah in the world was not to everyone, not to the whole world, but to specific individuals. And two, he's saying in the parentheses that where it says Nefesh Asa B'charan, even those people he influenced, they returned back to their original ways, which would mean most likely their pagan ways. But he says Kimeduma, which means he's speaking from memory, and obviously we trust the Rebbe Rashab's Kimeduma, but that's the language that he uses here. That's Avram. And that's what the Alter Rebbe is saying. But Moshe, Aval Moshe himshich hagili b'chlolos ha'elam. Moshe drew the gili in the entire world, general world. Sheyeh b'choltem lahamshich ha'er ve'gili, to give everybody the power in the entire world, the capacity to draw down this er and gili, not just to specific individuals. So there you have the distinction between Avram. He's going to say more on this, but I'm going to stop here. Distinction between Avram and Moshe. And that's why you can say Moshe is no psik time altogether. Because Moshe eliminated the barrier. There was no barrier left. I mean, there's a barrier because there's a structure of existence. But the ability to bring the highest levels of godliness down below, Moshe did, which is makes them matan terev v'shachanti b'seicham, the Mishkan. Avram began the process because he began to bring down the Shekhinah, but with certain limits, like he just explained. So it's greater than before Avram, or Avram before he was Avraham, where there was still some boundary. He began to eliminate the boundaries, but in the fullest sense of the word, it was Moshe and Moshe's time, the 7th generation, that did it in the fullest way, which is the actual Mishkan. Shechanti b'seicham, the Mishkan that was built by Moshe in his time. So that's how he explains the Medrash. It says that he was a gadol, but bezmanei, so he was a gadol agili rak be'elam Avram himshel gilek la'atzmei. In his time, there was nothing like him, but afterwards, it did not necessarily could perpetuate, as he just explained. So this is an interesting section in understanding Avram. Obviously, the Rebbe Rashab is not coming to minimize Avram's contribution. He's still Echad Haya Avram. He was the pioneer. He started the process. But at the end of the day, Avram was not Matan Torah, and it was not the Mishkan, and definitely not Mashiach and the Geula. But Avram still remains the one that began the whole process until this day, has an effect on all of us. So it's not like Avram did not have an effect. Because now when you speak about Moshe, Moshe's power comes because he followed, like the Rebbe says in the Maimer Basaligani, that the 7th generation comes because it's 7th from the first. There wasn't the first, we wouldn't have the 7th. So we are in the shoulders of the giants before us. So Avram on his own, compared to Moshe, this is the distinction. But Avram is part of the process that led to the 7th and to the Hamshacha, to the entire world. So just keep that in mind as well. So we'll stop here. Any questions?
That's called that Avraham mamshich ba'Atzilus, even though that Anoshim came Moisei, he was mamshich lamato.
Vice days, that's called, yeah. You have to say that's
Yeah.
what he means. Atzilus means, in other words, his main Amshacha was in Atzilus, and in the world, it had a limited hashpah, again, in his time. But we say B'risa Shel Avraham Avinu, even today, we still invoke Avram, obviously, in the office, because they are part of who we are. But essentially, as I said, once you have the next generations with Avram, everything comes together. Now, there's a reason why, because remember, everything has to have a process. Just like Matan Torah took 26 generations, Avram, same thing with Yitzhak, they each did their avodah like an education, step by step. So Avram did not achieve it all, but he began the process, and then the next generations continued the process of bringing the Shekhinah further down until Moshe culminated. But it's not 7 different levels, it's 7 steps in one process. I think that's vital to emphasize. Okay.
Yesterday,
You touched upon this briefly, and you said, I believe that Moshe, that Abraham was a revelation of Atzilus, and Moshe, you said either in the Bria or in Bria, but you definitely used the word Bria, and I just wanted to clarify because this sounds like Moshe brought it down into Asiya.
I said Asiya. I said
Well,
Moshe
I'll send you the I'll send you the quote.
So
the quip,
then I misspoke.
Okay, that's why I'm asking, because I thought it would be Asiya.
It's everything. Bri, Yitzir, Asiya, all the way. I mean, let's just forget about what I said. The language here is Lamata in the world, B'cholol Sha'elam, and giving the power, Er V'Gili, to the, in contrast to Avram. So clearly, Avram, he says Atzilus, and
that's
What I'm understanding,
Alter Rebbe
but
says Lamata. Moshe is Lamata. Like I said, the Mishkan was built on earth.
I'm with you. That's why
I asked the question. I know what you said yesterday
I don't know what
because I
said,
listened to the class twice.
I definitely did not mean Bria in contrast to Atzilus. I mean, if anything, I was speaking about from Atzilus, you go to Bria, and then Yitzira, and then Asiya.
Yeah. I thought you,
Okay, thank you.
I think that the Rebbe, the
I
Maimar
brought from the
Vasilgani, is
Likutei Torah that
explaining.
said that when Moshe spoke to Pare on earth in Erves Ha'aretz, not just in Asiya, but the most decadent part of Asiya, it says Moshe Atzilus was speaking to Pare on this. I brought that Likutei Torah as well in the context. Okay, yeah, go ahead.
I think in the Maimar Vasilgani, the Rebbe is saying that the Maimar from Moshe in Shicho Lamato Dolo La'aretz, which this is what's nagea to us. This is the
Well, of course,
tachlis.
the end of the process is the Deir Hashvi that brings it down all the way v'shachanti b'sechem into existence. Yeah.
Very
This is
interesting.
Moshe brought it also. He brought it down to earth, but it was not in a permanent way that forever and ever, like the Migdash Adnei Keni Yadecha, the Beis, the third Beis Hamikdash, the whole world will be transformed forever. But it's with the power of Matan Torah and the Shechina of the Mishkan and so on. Yeah.
It's very interesting the expression that the Rebbe Rashab is saying here, kinedume shemevoyo, and with that he is answering the Nefesh Asher also.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what he says. Yeah. It'd be interesting to find a source for that. I looked around, I didn't find, but
No, I in my mind, I don't remember the source. I hear this concept of Chazor and so on.
right. Okay. Any other questions or comments? Do you want to bring up your question now? I'm fine with it now.
Oh, well,
I mean, I think you explained it well enough. I guess my question was that
we understand.
the Shem Elohim is. You said that the Simpson, but I in Balabatisha way we talk about it, or if Rashi, it's the God of Deen, of judgment and justice and strictness, Gura. But that is essentially a hashgacha that reflects the causality of the way the way the world is structured in the Bria, meaning I mean in Bia specifically. Well, yeah, because no, I actually mean Abia, the whole creation. The notion. Well, I have to think about that one. Maybe you can comment, but that there are consequences for our actions. The world is set up in a way that if you, let's say, sin, there is a consequence. People say punishment. You like to use the word consequence. It's cause and effect, and in that sense, that's the hashgacha. That the hashgacha is that God sets up rules for the way this world works. If you break the rules, there's a consequence in the cosmic order of things. In that sense, it's a hashgacha of cause and effect in a, let's say, a more, I don't know, logical way. But Shem Havaya is a Shem of is God's name of mercy, of compassion, where He can essentially through chen, through grace, He can forgive you even if you make a mistake, a sin. So He can look beyond it, and He can essentially He can supersede and override these natural law rules, if you will, of consequentiality. And in that sense, Shem Elokim is a hashgacha in this world where we are forced to accept the way God is sovereign with cause and effect, with rules and consequences, versus Shem Havaya, in which He can override that. Is that not a fair understanding of Shem Elokim?
I would add some critical points. Elokim works together with Havaya Dilatata in the languages he's using here, because the angels that are the Einayim that he called the Einei Hashgacha, he called them Shluchei Shefa. It's not just about reward and punishment, it's also in general distributing and allocating the divine energy to each level. Everything should be sustained. So there's a lot more going on here in Hashgacha Pratis of Shem Elokim that is more than just reward and punishment. One aspect of that you said can be applied. So the whole process of the so-called the eyes of God, as he called it, the 7 levels, he says, 7 eyes, that are the Shiva Mides. Mides is much more than Elokim. Elokim allows that infinite light of Havaya that is not tailored to the structure of existence, like he explained. Why do we need the Malachim? So if you go back to page 1409, I believe, he said, because the Ur on its own would be too much. Would not be commensurate to the Elmas Tachtenim. So every part of the distribution of Ur Ein Sof has to go through a process, so that Elokim creates the tzimtzum that allows the kav to then serve the role. At the end of the day, the malachim, he said, are rooted in the outer dimensions of the containers, and they have an element of light because they're seeing. They're ene, they're not eyes that see. So I would say if you really break it down, this hashgacha encompasses essentially Elokim traveling through Havaya Dilatato or the kav or Ur, however you want to put it, the limited Ur that goes into Eris and Kalim, which allows that hashgacha to manifest. One application would be what you just described, that in the world under the structure of hashgacha from Shem Elokim is more like a law and order, cause and effect. And yes, if you want to invoke the Yud Gimel Midas HaRachmim, you can draw from a higher level that will forgive, which is what happened by Yud Gimel Midas HaRachmim. So that's how I would put it.
I know, but
Thank you. You did just say the hashgacha of Shem Elokim, and when I raised the notion that Shem Elokim has a hashgacha, you rejected it.
I don't want to say anything more. I think I said everything I have to say.
See, try to help. We'll see what happens.
The Mimer calls it hashgacha Shem Elokim. I'm explaining what he means in context of what we're learning now. The tzimtzum cannot be the hashgacha. The hashgacha is coming from the kav and the Ur, from the malachim. Malachim are not the tzimtzum. You need the tzimtzum in order to create a Ur that can relate to existence. That's what ultimately once you learn the whole picture. Overall, yes, you could say hashgacha from Shem Havaya, hashgacha from Shem Elokim. And I explained what that meant.
Okay. No, I appreciate the refinement. That was not clear to me. It's a more nuanced understanding and I'm grateful that you explained it in a much more refined manner. Thank you.
Okay.
Why do you need Malachim? He created Tzimtzum, and there are levels, and each different level is a different situation. Why do you need Malachim to do it?
Malachim are part of that system you just described. How levels, how different energies travel, just like shluchim. Hashem is using, like a melech has ministers, and he has delegated officials. The malachim are part of the process of Seder Ishtalshlus and Bria, Yitzir, Asiya, that do that work. As part
My
of
question is,
part of the
I
interfaces.
understand that, but
You could ask the same question about every level. Eidus, Kalim, Parsois. It's all part of a whole system at work. Like, the Moshel would be Malchusa Da'ada, like a kingdom. Why does a king need ministers and all these different levels of a hierarchy and so on?
So the levels are the Malachim?
Some of them are malachim, some are not. Some are oidus, and depending what level you're talking about. Malachim have a particular function. Look, Hashem sent 3 malachim to Avraham. Why didn't he send malachim? Why didn't he just tell Avraham himself all 3 things? He said malachim ashluchei hashefa. That's what he called it. So they're part of the process. They help elevate our prayers. They help us, give us strength. It's essentially a support system. If you want, you can call it the cosmic support system, or I call it the cosmic distribution system. I mean, there are a lot of ways you can call it.
Take, for example, a person that could reach Brio. He's reaching Brio, this level. What do you need a malach?
That's very nice. But maybe you ask me why Hashem created malachim, for example, when we say Shalom Aleichem, that escort us, because we can use as much support as we. Why would I would say we should have even more malachim? No.
Okay.
I mean, it's part of the system of helping bring down the shefa, helping us elevate. Ultimately, we reach to levels that are higher than malachim.
So why there you cannot call it Malachim? Higher than Malachim Atzilus.
Well, the Alter Rebbe says in Likutei Torah Vayikra that even Oir Ein Sof is called Shliach, because at the end of the day, it's a Shliach of Hashem. So you could call it a Shliach. Malachim have a particular role in particular worlds. It says Ein Malach Ba'Atzilus. In higher worlds, of Atzilus and higher, you're not going to find the word Malachim. But in worlds as they come down, like he explained, it goes from Atzilus into Bria, then the Malachim, then the Sorim Elyenim, Sorim of Nega, Shivim Sorim. It's essentially all part of a structure, a very elaborate, eloquent structure of hierarchy and a systematic way things work. Let me ask you, you know how many cells there are in the human body? They say between 30 trillion and 75 trillion. Why did God need to create so many cells? Why couldn't he just create one body and that's it, make it function? It doesn't have to have altogether all this diversity. You can ask the same question, but that creates a system the way he wanted, the seichel, the way God created it. It makes sense when you have a system made up of structure and you have this whole process. I mean, there's many, many aspects to this. The Rebbe once said the Rebbe could have brought the Mashiach and make a dira b'tachtenim. Why did he need shluchim? Because first he wanted to give them the schus, and also you want to bring it down to the level of the people that they can relate to it. The more you bring it down to that level, the more the interface is complete. So malachim serve a role where they're closer to us, so to speak, relate more to us than higher levels of elokus.
You mentioned
35 trillion cells. I just looked it up. ChatGPT says 37.2 trillion cells. What's interesting is that 84% of the body's cells are red blood cells, which are, you could argue, are shluchim, because they bring oxygen to all the other, and life, therefore, to all the other parts of the body. So I just found that insight interesting.
Yeah. That's correct.
That's fascinating that if they were able to find out these details, how many
Cells and
cells.
what they do. 200 different types of cells in the body. But this is probably for off the recording stuff.
Yeah, let me stop we're on page, we're up to 1414 down below. Let me stop